Welcome to Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk, 1180 for the best in Saturday Talk Radio at 1 o'clock. And now we're on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock on Saturday. And for the best in Wednesday Talk Radio on 1410 KERI at 1 o'clock. Your host is Clay Koerner, and I'm Marty Pay. And behind the big board, our producer, Greg Held. Clay, great show last week with Assemblyman David Valadeo.
Well, yeah, David was good, but I really was impressed with our second guest.
Oh, you mean David Titus?
Yes, he was hilarious.
Very funny book. Coach, Don't Put Me In. Highly recommend that book. Today we've got a much more serious show. Our second guest is Joseph Klein, author of Lethal Engagement, Obama, the UN, and Radical Islam. He's going to talk about Israel and the UN and in our first in the Middle East, and before I introduce our first guest, I want to tell you a little background story here. When I left the Marines in the early 70s, I wasn't very political, but the one issue that really grabbed me, touched my heart, was the POW MIA issue. So I volunteered for them, did a lot of speaking for them in the early 70s. So this issue is one that still bothers me, it's still with me, and the idea of an American soldier being held by enemy combatants still rubs me the wrong way. On June 30th, 2009, Sergeant Bergdahl was captured by the Haganah network of a Taliban affiliate. 3 years later, he is still there. Our first of two guests to talk about this American soldier is Colonel Timothy Marsano, the Public Affairs Officer for the Idaho National Guard and the spokesperson for the Bergdahl family. Colonel, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So, and again, I appreciate you coming on. I know this is tough for you. Tell us a little bit about what you do for the Idaho National Guard. You're actually in the Air Force or the Army? You're in the Army, right?
I'm actually an Air Force officer. I am the Adjutant General's Public Affairs Officer. He happens to also be an Air Force officer, but his predecessors were both Army. So I'm what you call purple. I'm neither blue suit nor green suit in the Army, but I represent both of them as his public affairs representative. But as you mentioned, I'm also the spokesperson or the media liaison for Mr. and Mrs. Bergdahl, who are the parents of Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl, as you mentioned, who's being held in that area of the world by insurgents.
So, and you're the one actually, unfortunately, that has to go out and tell parents when an Army or an Air Force soldier in Idaho is killed in action, right? Are you the one that actually goes out and makes that call?
Well, we have notification officers trained for that specific purpose, and it's the proverbial knock on the door. Usually right. One of our trained casualty notification officers goes to the home along with one of our chaplains, and they are the ones who have the unfortunate task of breaking that sad news. And what happens then is we assign a casualty assistance officer, and that will take the parents or the spouse or the next of kin of a killed in action member through the process to help them through the very heavy burden of doing all the things that need to be done prior to the interment of their loved one. And that process takes quite a while. Where I come into it is if they don't want to speak to the media, then they'll ask for assistance, and I provide that assistance, which I've done about 24 times. Mm-hmm. In this case, the Bergdahl family made it very clear at the outset of this situation that they did not want to deal directly with the media and asked me to help them, and I've been helping them ever since I was brought into this in early July, really 2 days after the capture took place back in July of 2009.
Well, tell us what happened. Tell us about the capture and what we know.
Well, the one person who knows exactly what happened is unavailable for comment, and that is Sergeant Bergdahl himself. We've pieced together certain parts of it. We know that in one way or another he did leave his installation in Afghanistan, was soon taken captive by insurgents there, and has been held ever since. There's been probably 4 or 5 videos that have come out from the insurgents, propagandistic videos, and perhaps some of your listeners may have seen some of those or heard about those. And what I do when those things come out is I work with the Bergdahls, and since they don't want to talk to the media directly, I usually put statements out on their behalf. So we have a very, very close working relationship, and I'm doing whatever I can to help them through this very tragic ordeal.
Our guest by phone is Colonel Marsano, spokesperson for the family of POW Sgt. Bowe Bergdahl.
Sergeant, this is Clay, and being a little naive, I was watching Fox News the other night, which only conservatives tend to watch, I guess. But they were talking about the White House was in negotiations to do a trade for 5 high-ranking Taliban that are in with that prison. What's it called?
Guantanamo?
That's it, yeah. 5 high-ranking Taliban for that particular soldier. Do you know anything about that?
Well, you're right. That is in the news. The talks are potentially, or were potentially going to happen in the state of Qatar, Persian Gulf nation of Qatar. And the idea was the Taliban was going to set up an office there to talk to foreign envoys, and the United States does have one prepared and working to make things happen with the Taliban as sort of an initial way of settling the situation there in Afghanistan. The idea was potentially to release 5 high-ranking Taliban detainees that are being held at Guantanamo and release them to another set of being captured, if you will, or being held prisoner, and that was going to be in Qatar. And last I heard was the talk was to potentially have them as prisoners under house arrest in Qatar. There's been a lot of contention about that on both sides of the aisle in D.C. because who knows what their release might lead to as far as prolonging the situation in Afghanistan. But and the idea also was maybe a prisoner swap would be considered with such a situation. But I read this morning that the Taliban have pulled out of those talks, so I don't know where that leaves us.
Oh, I think they may have pulled out because the United States, is putting so many requirements on this swap. But historically, the U.S. never negotiates, never trades. And personally, I think it's a bad idea because all it does is lead to the Taliban trying to capture more of our soldiers for future use in negotiations.
Yeah, there's absolutely no easy solution to any of these things. I think all we can do is talk and try to come up with an arrangement that works for everybody. But wars are never settled strictly on the battlefield. They're settled at the diplomatic tables.
Mm-hmm. There was a report. I saw this in a UK newspaper that Sergeant Bergdahl escaped and was recaptured. Do you know anything about that?
There was a single source report that came out a couple of months ago claiming that somebody in Pakistan had seen him alive, but there was no confirmation on that report. So we don't know if it's actually true. But if it is true, it shows that Sergeant Bergdahl is doing what he should be doing and trying to escape and return home with dignity and honor.
Do you know how many other prisoners that they might have that are U.S. citizens or U.S. soldiers?
The only prisoner that I know of that's being held by the Taliban, military prisoner, is Sergeant Bergdahl. And
do you know where they're keeping him?
Nobody does exactly know where they're keeping him. Certainly the effort is there to try to pinpoint that, but we don't know as yet.
I saw a great movie the other night called Act of Valor with the SEALs. I was impressed and amazed at what the United States can do if they really want to. And I think if they really want this guy, if they know where he is, they'll get him.
Well, the key is knowing where he is. Yeah. I think that's the bottom line. But,
I think the term is actionable intelligence, and I just don't know that that's there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you can't discuss Department of Defense activity, and I appreciate you telling us what you have. But the last video that came out of his is fairly old. Isn't it 6 months old? Or
I think perhaps even older than that. There's been, I want to say, 4 or 5 of these videos that have come out, but some of them are simply footage taken, we know, from previous videos. So I'm not sure that there's been anything new in quite a while, perhaps a year or so.
I just wanted to share with you, since you are part of the military, that my job in the service was the information officer in the Inspecting General's office in Texas. So we have a little bit in common there.
Yeah, I've been in the information business for a long time. I began my career as a investigator with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and then I became an intelligence officer with the Idaho Air National Guard, and I did that for 12 years, and been doing this job myself as a public information and public affairs officer for about the last 10 years. So, yeah, the information business is a key to any organization's success, and I'm pleased to be doing what I can.
Now, before we let you go, who specifically, if you can tell us, are the Taliban?
Well, the Taliban are an integral part of society in Afghanistan. They are considered an insurgent group. Then they actually ran the country after the Soviets pulled out in the late 80s, early 90s. So with the Taliban in power in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda was sort of given the welcome sign to come in and set up their training camps, which, as we all know, led to the events of September 11th, 2001. So the Taliban in power in Afghanistan is not considered a good idea by really anybody in the Western world.
Definitely. Colonel, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate this. And if you could please let us know if there's any other updates, and we'd love to have you back on again.
Will do. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
When we come back, we'll talk to one of the people behind the website, supportbowe.org. We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business.